And if you're wondering why the Chief of Application Systems Division is here, it's because September 30th, I was the Chief of the Identity and Access Management Division at NIST. And we did a little reorg. I still have Identity and Access Management. We just have been combined with a much bigger division. So we still are managing that. We manage the NIST Identity Management System as well as the CDM Identity Management System. Press the big green button, she says. All right. So just a little bit about NIST, if you don't know. We're the people that do the FIPS standards and all the special publications, but I'm actually over on the operations side. So I'm probably more like most of you, just trying to guess what they meant when they wrote them. And they're kind of up the hall, so sometimes I cheat and just walk up and ask them. But NIST is really a research organization. We have 6 laboratory programs, 2 user facilities, and 3 innovation and industry services. But really, those 11 units, it seems to me like their mission is to operate as independently as they possibly can. And we like to say that we're more like an academic institution than a business or a government facility. In my opinion, NIST is really just the right size. We have about 5,000 to 5,500 staff a year, and it actually fluctuates because about half of our staff is what we refer to as associates. This would include our contractors, but we have a lot of guest researchers that come in, postdoc workers, students, and those people can be particularly challenging because while there's always kind of right around 2,500 of them, about half of them switch out each year. So about half those people leave and are replaced with new people each year. We have 2 primary sites, one in Gaithersburg just up the road and another in Boulder, Colorado, and then 25 smaller sites or co-location facilities where we're with somebody else. These are the NIST core values, and I just put these up here because the first one, perseverance, really describes the NIST Identity Management Program. Because NIST was founded in 1901. And I'm going to skip 95 years until 1996 when they actually hired me. And surprisingly, they didn't foresee that I was going to do identity management. They hired me as a software developer into the speech recognition group. But in 1996, NIST was really decentralized. Only the network backbone, our central computing facility, we had a mainframe that did the financials, and really the scientific computers were operated centrally. Everything else was run by the labs. The labs picked up the network connection right off the router, and they ran all the LANs, they ran all their own DNS, they ran their own email, and they were completely distributed. From an identity management perspective, well, we had the NFC data for who were employees, and we had a very complete mainframe directory for really a phone book. And then the closest thing we had was there was an account management system that you needed to be in to get a mainframe or supercomputer account. So my journey began in 1997 when they pulled me out of the speech recognition group and said, you know what, we want you to write a system to track network account requests. People are complaining that they submitted a request a year ago and they haven't seen their network connection. Said, okay, that's great. How am I going to have people log into this? And it's like, well, there's no central account for all the people here. There's no authoritative source of all the NIST staff to even know who should be able to get an account, who can approve it, anything along those lines. So I started off actually as a user that was looking for an identity management solution. So I didn't have much luck actually in the beginning. And in 2000, we actually started to do more centralization. Really, what happened was NIST's upper management created ITL, the standards organization, and that's actually where originally the CIO's office was located, underneath the ITL organization. And they decided, you know what, we're going to start to centralize some of these IT services. And the first one was actually email, and that was really the driver at NIST, because when I started at NIST, I had an @ncsl.nist.gov address. All the labs had their own email. So we centralized the email and we centralized the account management. I will admit I punted on the whole billable account system and we made it overhead. But then we also implemented an e-approval, an electronic workflow, forms and digital signature solution that used PKI that we stood up at NIST. So we expanded that AMS that we had just for the central computing facility so that it handled all these central usernames, all the email addresses, and all the issuance of the PKI credentials. But really, and this was brought up somewhere else, the reason why we took on identity management was to improve the efficiency. It really wasn't until 2002 with FISMA and when we were actually trying to implement it within NIST that we decided that we needed to really make improved security a primary goal of our identity management system. And really, in order to do that, we had to put in some policies. We created an account management policy. And the account management policy was really around trying to implement these tighter controls on the accounts and really the status of people. So at NIST, what we did was we created 2 onboarding systems. One was for HR, for employees, because if anybody's worked with the NFC file, you know it's not that current as far as when people arrive and when they depart. So we added an HR arrivals and departures system, and then we created a system called the NIST Associates Information System to handle anybody that's not in the NFC file. And then we had to put this policy, like I said, in place, and the policy mandated that if you're going to get an IT account, you have to either be in that HRAD system or be in the NACE system. And then we further went through and said if you're in the lab and you're running an IT system, you have to synchronize all your accounts with the AMS and with the account status there. And in the beginning, that was files mostly. We shipped out files that people picked up and scripted in. In 2008, we really tried to modernize things. We came out with new versions of the associate system, the NACE system, new versions of HRADs. We also recognized that trying to deal directly with those 2 individual systems was a little bit troublesome, so we added another layer called the Central People Repository that merged those folks together, because we have a lot of people that that they're working today, and then they come back tomorrow as they retire and they come back as an associate the next day. So we needed a way to kind of buffer that. And we actually replaced that, the AMS system with the COTS IDAM solution, COTS Identity and Access Management solution. And then the next thing that we did, and this is, I think, is a challenge for most people because it took a long time at NIST, was we really consolidated all the ADs. So NIST had on the order of 20 different Active Directories, and they were operated within most of the labs. We significantly reduced those ADs, and all those ADs are directly managed by the Identity and Access Management System now. So the next big thing that came out for us was really our PIV implementation. We did a lot of work with PIV, and we went through and completed a pilot trying to figure out how we were going to fit it into the full identity management system. And in 2011, we came out with a plan where we essentially integrated the NIST Identity and Access Management System with US Access. We replaced our NIST PKI that we were using for email encryption and the digital signatures with the PIV card. And we enabled the PIV authentication in all the AD, which was pretty straightforward, and started to deploy, PIV required login with all of, we're using machine-based enforcement, which probably most of you are, for the Windows machines and also for our remote access to our network. At that point, we identified that, having people going directly at the AD environment was problematic, so we started to push SAML via ADFS in our environment for application authentication. In 2013, we were thrown a wrench as we moved all the email to the cloud. We took on AWS and said that, pretty much we want to use our computing facilities for scientific computing only. So get all that administrative stuff out of here. And we're not very far along on that, but we are still working towards getting getting everything up in the cloud. And we adopted, several platforms that were key in our environment. We moved all of our web presence out to Drupal in the cloud. We selected a customer relationship management system. We were using the learning management system that was provided by Department of Commerce. And we selected a service management platform to use pretty much across the CIO organization. So what we learned there was, prior to this, it was pretty nice. We could just be technologists. We were sitting there and we were working with the different other technical groups within NIST. And we were having fun integrating everything. And we actually rolled over some staff in this time because a lot of the jobs that needed to be done within my organization became working on statement of works, right? And kind of working with vendors in these business units to really get them to understand that they still want to be integrated with the central identity management. So, we found that it was best to have some prepared documentation. We found the SAML implementation was huge as far as integrating these cloud services, but the PIV was a nice stick. So if somebody said, oh, they didn't do SAML, I said, well, you can always do PIV natively, and usually they'd add SAML into their service. And then we had to kind of redo some of those policies, and really it was just a matter of going back to that AMS policy and saying, yeah, even if you're getting a cloud service, this stuff still applies. In 2016, the CIO organization dived really heavily into service management. So we adopted ServiceNow, and we started to move much of the user interfaces that our customer base interacts with the CIO organization into ServiceNow and into the service management portal. And then our CIO became the director of management resources, which is our HR, our acquisitions, our facilities, our physical security, and the CIO organization. And he essentially took that service management approach up a level. And he's really moving all of those services, the HR, activities, acquisitions, everything into that same service management platform. So this is involving all of the support organizations, and we're really starting to try to transition away from people dealing directly with identity management and having the identity management system, the identity management system become really a back office application that's fed from our service management platform. We're trying to integrate a lot of those processes, a lot of the things where they used to go in and request that the domain account and the email account into really just the onboarding process. I mentioned about the associates. We categorize our associates. We actually have 14 different categories for associates and employees. And we use that type of information to kind of set up default profiles for what somebody's going to get. And we're really hoping to see some significant efficiency gains as we really combine the identity management processes with the other business processes within NIST. And we're taking on an onboarding project in FY19. And this is a little bit different. We've already we get people when they come in the door, but now we're extending this to actually before they start. So the interface will be available for them to complete the paperwork and take training before they actually show up at NIST. So the next thing that happened is we have taken on another project which is called CyberLocks. The goal of the CyberLocks is really to try to replace the use of keys with the PIV cards at NIST. So there are digital locks that are installed on each door and managed centrally. So we're extending the access control to the space and potentially even devices. We have some labs that are connecting these things to laboratory instruments or things like a lathe in a machine room. And one of the requirements for us is now we're trying to bring safety into our identity management system. So the goal is to really incorporate safety training into the access control decisions. We don't like to rely on people to do it. So the idea would be when somebody comes in, they're assigned a project. A project has a set of space that's associated with it, but we don't actually let them open the door until we see that they have the training in the CLC and we can log that they're authorized for that space. Some of the other things, the idea of you have somebody, office space or lab space that's undergoing construction, and you have the looky-loos that always want to go in and check out how things are going. So we're looking to add the ability to basically remove everybody's access temporarily and then put it back whenever the events happen in our inside space. It's not to say that we don't have some continuing challenges. The biggest one is really the explosion of roles, as we refer to it. I'm a division chief. The middle of the year last year, I was the division chief of the Identity Management Division and the acting division chief for the Application Systems Division. And then I was also a backup division chief for our Business Systems Division, right? So we actually have within our system over 100 different variations of the division chief role. And we're finding this same kind of an explosion across the privilege management roles as we're sitting there trying to maintain them. With privilege management, and this was touched on, you have the added complexity of trying to attach those roles to a set of assets that you want the person to be able to have access to. And we're hoping that with the service management interface, that we'll have some improvements in the UI that we can work there. And also the ability to kind of link the assets that we're tracking there with the people and the roles that they have. The other challenge that we found is really shared services. I'm a big supporter of shared services. I love US Access. It was my first experience with a shared service. I like the APIs. We were one of the first ones connected. And then the next one I went to use was the Commerce Learning Center. And it was not the same experience. They basically told us we had to ship files to tell them, to update our users, and they'd import them like once a week. And there was no federation for authentication, and there was no API for data retrieval. But that was really an educational experience, both for us and for those business owners. We really just needed to be more engaged and make sure that when they're doing those contracts, because these are being done by the business units in most cases, that they really understand what they need to include. And on the plus side, we have a new DOC CLC contract, and it's much better. We have addressed most of the issues in that area. The challenge we're still facing is really the non-Windows PIV authentication. We have a significant number of Macs, mobile devices, and Linux systems. And PIV support on these platforms varies. It'd be great if everybody would just accept using Windows, but we're supporting it across the board. Right now, we're moving to native binding with AD and PIV support in the Mac, and we're having very good experience with that. And we've had PIV logon on the Mac for a long time, and right now we're actually piloting the PIV required logon. We're also working with ITL on a derived PIV proof of concept. And that's another one where part of the derived PIV implementation is really being able to manage those devices so that when, because the users don't know which credential they lost. They know they lost their phone. So if I have multiple derived PIV credentials issued to this person, I need to be able to tell which one to revoke on my end. And I know that everybody's very interested in this, so I put a plug in. I did talk to the guys down the hall, and ITL is planning on some updates to FIPS 201 in 2020, and they promise to be looking at alternative form factors, let's say, for the PIV authentication. Another one is still user-based enforcement. At NIST, things have evolved over time, and there was a time when we were telling everybody, well, just do your authentication off of the AD. And now they're coming back and telling us, well, oh, you told us to do the authentication off the AD. And I'm like, yeah, but that was 15 years ago. So how about we switch it now? We are still using machine-based enforcement. We really took full advantage of the CDM cred management effort, and we went through and inventoried everything that we could find to figure out what was going to be a blocker for switching over to user-based enforcement. And we found some. So we're currently working through the process of planning how we're going to migrate them out. And we're making a lot of progress with our Mac platform. So really, that's where we are at NIST. I thank you for your time, and I'll take some questions.
So
You got to wait for the microphone. Get your hand slapped.
So I'm interested in you're eating your own dog food, right? It looks like you've begun to do some of that with ITL, and they write stuff. And how do you guys work on that? Is that something that you have as a goal to do now, to make sure that when they say something, you guys can implement it?
So, if only. Well, it's interesting. We try to. ITL is very great to work with. They give us, they give us a heads up, and when stuff is kind of identity management related, we get usually a preview before maybe other people do, and get the ability to comment back on the on the standards before they go out, and have input when we can. And they also have, if you're familiar with the NCCOE, and we try to use the NCCOE as much as we can. We can go over there and kind of build out. That's where we're doing our derived PIV implementation with them. So we do try to work with them closely. But it's funny because ITL will write something, and then there's other various three-letter government agencies that will interpret it and come back and tell us what to do, right? And I've had discussions with folks in ITL where I'm like, well, is this what you meant? And they said, well, it doesn't really matter now. So we do try to work with them, and they really, from their end, they view it as we have to always be pushing the bar. Right, so they're not necessarily interested in the standard that's something that you can implement right now today. They are trying to push the bar in most cases. So, hope that answers your question.
You did, thank you.
Yeah. Yep.
Standard is a standard. Thank you very much. ITIL creates a standard, but there are many reference models to implement the standard. So are you creating a set of reference model with a set of tools and configurations so that this becomes one of the template that people can take and start run with it, or this is going to be another, I'm just trying to understand, okay, their standard, they define the requirement, and you take this requirement and start to split it out and say, these are the things I'm going to implement, this is the way I'm going to implement, that's the process, that's the interaction between various systems. So what is it that your organization is doing so that we can learn from that so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel? That's my point.
So again, I'm probably more like you, okay, than like the ITL side of the things, right? From an ITL side and in NCCOE, they do try to do a lot of reference implementations, but I have a 100-year-old organization with a lot of legacy, so the reference implementation is probably as applicable to me as it is to you. We do try to work with them, from that, but there's a lot of complications there. There's the acquisitions process. The reference implementation may use a particular set of tools that I can't buy. There's lots of challenges there. So our identity management solution is really much more of a product of how it's evolved over the last 20 years than any particular standard that ITL has put out. We're trying to adapt what we have to the new standards as they come out. We can't pick up and replace everything either.
You are still relying on COTS products.
We are relying on a lot of COTS products. We have a lot of in-house developed, but when you're talking about like the PIV implementation and those kinds of interfaces, I mean that's all COTS. So. Anything else?
One of the challenging use cases in a laboratory environment is where the scientist or the person is in need of their PIV card to log into their one computer while they're logged into a second computer that is supposed to be PIV enabled. So have you guys dealt with that yet?
Yeah, it varies. One of the things that we have is the setting that requires that when you pull the card and the machine lock, We actually put that somewhat under the lab control, so that basically they can configure machines so that they can, pull the card out, and the machine continues to go. But we do have systems. So one of the things that we've done from the AD environment is, you can push multiple certificates into the AD under one account. So if you have a machine like in a lab that needs to have multiple people accessing it, and so we have machines where you really don't want that user logging out. That user that's running that experiment is really a third-party account, and we're mapping multiple PIV cards to it, if that makes sense, so that you can use the multiple cards in it. And there are machines in the lab space that we don't PIV require. We still have machines that we just can't PIV require in the labs.
Since you use the word multiple certificates, are you binding the certificate to the application itself, or just creating that, just an access to the application?
So these are actually, the certificates are bound to the AD account, okay? And then that machine, in a lab machine, that machine is using that particular AD account, but you may have multiple people that can use it. All right. Well, I'm getting that. So thank you very much.